Summary. Sometimes, life changes not with a grand event, but with a quiet visit on an ordinary afternoon. What began as a weekend stay turned into a moment that made me see myself and family in a way I never had before. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now before I begin, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was one of those slow, golden afternoons when the air seems to hold its breath. I was standing at my kitchen window, watching the last of the summer light slide across the garden, when the phone buzzed. My brother's name flashed on the screen. We hadn't spoken properly in months, not because of any bad blood, but because life has a way of stacking responsibilities like unsteady dishes. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Hey, sis. Listen, would you mind if Ethan stayed with you for a few days? He's got a photography project near your area, and I think it'd be good for him to have some company." Ethan, my nephew. 24 now, I think. I hadn't seen him since he was a teenager. Awkward, quiet, all elbows and long hair. I agreed before really thinking it through, picturing the boy I remembered, not the man he had become. When he arrived 2 days later, I almost didn't recognize him. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, but what struck me most wasn't his appearance. It was the way he carried himself. Calm, observant, with that thoughtful stillness that seems to come from people who look at the world a little differently. His eyes had that same soft green his father and I shared, but there was something deeper behind them, something that made me feel as though he saw right through the walls I'd built over the years. The first evening we sat on the porch, the air warm but fading into coolness as the sun dropped behind the oaks. He talked about his project, photographing small-town life, finding stories in faces, in quiet corners most people overlook. I listened, nodding, sipping iced tea, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. It had been a long time since I'd felt that kind of comfort, that sense that someone was really listening. At one point, he lifted his camera and asked if he could take my picture. I laughed, waved him off. "Oh, please, I'm not camera material anymore." But he said, "You are, though. You just don't see it." Something about the way he said it made me pause. He wasn't flattering me. His tone was too honest for that. So I let him take the picture. The click of the shutter felt like a moment being pinned in time. Later, after dinner, we washed dishes side by side. He told me about his father, how work had changed him, how distance had crept between them without anyone meaning for it to happen. I felt a pang of guilt. My brother and I used to be inseparable, but we both drifted into our own lives, convincing ourselves that family bonds didn't need tending. That night, after he went to bed in the guest room, I sat in the quiet kitchen staring at the photo he'd shown me on his camera screen. There I was, standing in the porch light, a half smile on my face, a trace of something in my eyes I couldn't quite name. Maybe loneliness. Maybe peace. Maybe both. Over the next few days, I found myself looking forward to our conversations. He'd sit with his coffee in the mornings, editing his photos, and I'd make breakfast, pretending not to be curious, but always asking questions. He showed me images of people from nearby towns, shopkeepers, farmers, children playing in dusty streets. Each one seemed to carry a quiet story, and through his lens, I began to see beauty in places I'd long overlooked. We drove together to the lake one afternoon, the one where my brother and I used to swim as kids. The water shimmered like glass, and I could almost hear echoes of our laughter from years ago. Ethan waded in up to his knees, taking photos of the light on the surface. I stood behind him, feeling something shift quietly inside me, a mix of nostalgia, pride, and something gentler, something I couldn't name yet. That evening, as we drove back, the sun dipped low, painting the fields in a soft orange haze. He turned to me and said, "You know, Aunt Claire, you have this way of looking at things, like you're remembering them as you see them." I smiled, not sure what to say. But that sentence stayed with me long after he'd gone to bed that night, echoing through the stillness of my house. I didn't know it then, but that visit, the conversations, the quiet moments, the way he looked at the world, was changing something in me. Something I hadn't realized had gone dim was flickering back to life. The morning after that thought settled in, I woke to the smell of coffee already brewing. The sound of quiet humming drifted from the kitchen. Ethan's voice, low and steady, a tune I couldn't quite place. For a moment, standing at the top of the stairs in my old robe, I felt something I hadn't in a long while. Warmth, not from the coffee or the sunlight pouring through the window, but from the simple presence of another person in the house. He greeted me with an easy smile, holding up a mug. "Thought I'd beat you to it this morning." I laughed. Well, I could get used to this. We sat at the kitchen table, and as the steam rose between us, we talked about small things: the weather, the neighbors, the sound of trains that still passed through town in the middle of the night. Then, in the pauses, other things began to surface. He asked about my work, my marriage, my brother when he was younger. I hadn't thought about most of it in years. The light through the window softened his face, and for a moment I saw my brother in him, his quick smile, his calm patience. But there was something uniquely Ethan, too, something gentler. He listened the way few people do anymore, not waiting for his turn to speak, but truly listening. By noon, we were driving again, this time to the small farmers' market in town. The road wound through fields still green from late summer, and I felt oddly like I was showing him my life, piece by piece. The way the road bent around the church, the old red barn that had been leaning for as long as I could remember, even the stray dog that always seemed to appear near the general store. At the market, people greeted me by name. I introduced him as my brother's son, and everyone commented on how grown he was, how he had his father's eyes. He smiled politely, his camera slung around his neck, and asked permission before taking anyone's photo. There was a quiet respect in the way he worked, a sensitivity that made even the shyest faces open up to him. Afterward, we stopped at a diner for pie. He took a picture of me holding a forkful of apple crumble Madeira, then laughed when I scolded him. "You're going to make me famous for all the wrong reasons," I said. He shrugged. "That's what makes it real. The small, unguarded moments." His words lingered in the air. I thought about all the guarded moments I'd lived through, the times I'd smiled through disappointment, kept busy through loneliness, stayed quiet when I should have spoken. Maybe that's what age does to us. It makes us careful with the world and careful with ourselves. Back home, the afternoon heat settled in. We worked side by side in the garden, trimming the roses and clearing the path. I could tell he wasn't used to this kind of work. His hands were quick, but he kept wiping sweat from his brow, laughing at himself. It was a small thing, but it filled the yard with an ease I hadn't felt in a long while. Later, as twilight crept in, we sat on the porch again, this time with the soft hum of crickets around us. He showed me the photos he'd taken that day, portraits of strangers, landscapes washed in gold, and one photo of me I didn't realize he'd captured. I was reaching up to tie my hair back, my face half hidden in the sunlight. "That's how you look when you forget to think," he said quietly. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was more of an observation, one that saw past the surface. I found myself wondering when I'd last been seen that way. We talked long after the stars appeared, about art, family, and the strange ways life teaches us things we never asked to learn. He told me about the loneliness that came with being his father's son, how expectations sometimes felt heavier than love itself. I listened, realizing that though he was young, his eyes carried an understanding beyond his years. When he finally stood to go inside, he paused at the door. "You know, Aunt Claire, I didn't think I'd find much here when Dad sent me. But I think I needed this more than I realized." I watched him go, his words echoing in the quiet yard. There was something about the way he said it that made my throat tighten. Maybe we were both looking for something, just in different ways. That night, as I sat in bed reading, I heard the faint sound of his camera shutter from down the hall. One click, then another. It was strangely comforting, that sound, the way it marked each passing moment, catching fragments of life that might otherwise be forgotten. I lay there in the dark, thinking about how people can come into your life for reasons you don't yet understand. Sometimes it's not about lessons or revelations. It's just about being reminded that connection still matters, that hearts don't stop growing simply because the years keep adding up. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized something quietly profound. The third morning of Ethan's visit began with the sound of rain. It wasn't the heavy, thunderous kind, but a steady, whispering rain that softened everything. The air, the light, even my thoughts. I stood by the window, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, watching the droplets gather and slide down the glass. The garden looked different in that gray light, more intimate somehow, like it was drawing closer to the house. Ethan appeared in the doorway, hair mussed, holding his camera like it was part of him. "You ever notice how rain changes sound?" he asked. "Everything slows down, like the world's taking a breath." I smiled. It's always been my favorite kind of day. The house feels alive when it rains. He nodded, moving to the window beside me, and for a long while we just stood there. No words, no rush. The only sounds were the rain and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I couldn't remember the last time I'd shared silence that felt so easy. When the rain let up, he asked if I wanted to go for a drive. I hesitated, but something in his tone, gentle, hopeful, made me grab my coat. The world outside smelled fresh and new, every color deeper and richer from the rain. We drove with the windows cracked, letting the cool breeze sweep through. He took us down old roads I hadn't been on in years, ones that twisted between fields and through small clusters of houses that seemed forgotten by time. He stopped often to take photos, raindrops clinging to a fence post, a child in a red coat walking with her mother, the reflection of the sky in a puddle. I watched him work, seeing how completely he gave himself to the moment. It was beautiful, in a quiet, unassuming way. At one point he handed me the camera. "Here, take one." I laughed. "Me? Oh no, I'm not made for these gadgets." "Just look," he said. The morning of Ethan's last day came too soon. The sun rose slow and golden, stretching through the curtains in long, gentle lines. I woke early before the birds even started their song, and for a moment I lay there just listening, to the stillness, to the faint creaks of the old house, to the quiet that I knew would return once he left. It felt heavier now, knowing what it would sound like without him in it. When I came downstairs, he was already in the kitchen, making breakfast like it was his home. The smell of toast and coffee filled the air. He smiled when he saw me, that same easy smile that had come to mean so much in just a few days. "Morning," he said. "I hope you don't mind. I figured I'd cook today." I shook my head. Not at all. It's nice having someone else take care of things for a change. We ate quietly for a while, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because there was too much. Every small sound, the scrape of a fork, the whistle of the kettle, seemed to underline the fact that time was running out. After breakfast, we took one last walk through town. The streets were quiet, just a few early risers opening shop doors or sweeping sidewalks. The leaves had begun to turn, brushing the edges of the trees with gold and rust. It was the kind of morning that felt suspended between seasons, and I suppose, in a way, that's how I felt too, somewhere between who I had been and who I was becoming. We stopped by the lake before heading home. The water was calm, mirroring the pale blue of the sky. Ethan crouched by the edge, camera in hand, taking a few final shots. Then he stood and looked at me. "Can I take one more?" he asked. I nodded. Go ahead. This time I didn't pose. I just stood there, feeling the cool air against my skin, watching the way the light rippled across the surface of the water. The click of the shutter came softly, and when he lowered the camera, I could see that his eyes were a little brighter than usual. I'll send you a copy, he said, but I think this one's more for me than for the project. Something in his tone made me reach out, resting my hand lightly on his arm. You've got a good heart, Ethan. Your father may not always say it, but he's proud of you. I know he is. He looked at me for a long moment before nodding. I think I understand him better now. And you too. We drove back in near silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, just full of everything we weren't saying aloud. When we got home, he packed his bags, checked his camera gear, and finally stood in the doorway with that uncertain expression people get when they don't quite want to leave. I don't know how to thank you, he said. This week, it was different. I didn't expect to feel so connected, I guess. I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. You gave me something too, more than you realize. He hugged me then, and for a moment, I could almost feel the years between us collapse. The aunt who'd watched him grow, the woman who'd forgotten how to slow down and see the world. When he finally let go, I felt both full and empty all at once. After his car disappeared down the road, I stood on the porch for a long time, the air still carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. The house was quiet again, but not in the same way it had been before. The silence didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt alive, like it was holding something new. Inside, on the kitchen table, he'd left a small envelope. Inside was a printed photo, the one he'd taken by the lake that morning. In it, I stood near the water's edge, hair loose, eyes soft, a faint smile caught between past and present. On the back, he'd written in neat handwriting, "For the moments we almost forget to see ourselves." I sat down, holding that photo, and something warm spread through me. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like gratitude. I realized that his visit hadn't been about nostalgia or family obligation. It had been about rediscovery, about remembering that life still has room for change, for quiet awakenings, no matter how many years have passed. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the light filled the house with gold again, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The garden outside was calm, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the photos he'd sent me earlier, the faces of strangers, the colors of small towns, and the images of me that looked like someone I'd only just met. Someone softer, someone present. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like time was something slipping away. I felt like it was something I was still a part of, something still unfolding. That night, before I went to bed, I took one of his old cameras from the shelf where he'd left it by mistake. I aimed it at the garden through the window, at the lights of the fireflies beginning to flicker in the dark, and I pressed the shutter. A quiet click. A beginning caught in the middle of an ending. And somewhere, deep down, I knew my brother's son would never know just how much his visit had changed me. But that was all right. Some changes don't need to be spoken. They just live on, quietly, in the way we start to see the world again. Don't forget to give us like and subscribe this video.